Last week, saw players like Zay Flowers, James Cook, Emeka Egbuka go off in your fantasy lineups, at least hopefully. All right, who are the guys this week that could have huge games in week 2? Let's figure it out. These are our boom picks. All right, Chris, you're going to start us off with a player who's going to be in the very final game of the week.
Final game of the week, going to have, I don't want to say the biggest game of the week, but he's going to have one of the biggest games of the week, and that's Ladd McConkey. I know a lot of people are a little nervous right now about Ladd McConkey after what happened last week on that Friday night game. You know, they see Keenan Allen had all these catches, scored a touchdown. Quentin Johnston had 2 touchdowns, and then there's Ladd McConkey. He was fine, but they're like, why wasn't all that going to Ladd McConkey? But I'm going to tell you to relax a little bit. Let's pump the brakes. Let's take a deeper look, and I think after you see this, you're going to feel a lot better. And I think you're going to want to start him this week because I think he's going to absolutely go off. First of all, he finished 15th in routes run last week among all wide receivers, and 11th in targets among all wide receivers. So the usage was there. It wasn't like this guy was, standing there watching Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston get all the catches. And then you look at it just among his teammates. He finished first on the team in routes, second in air yards, only 4 less than Quentin Johnston. Tied with Keenan Allen in targets. Tied with Keenan in first read percentage. Also, a lot of people were worried, like, with Keenan there, he's going to have to move outside. He's better in the slot. Well, he played 50% of the snaps from the slot, which led everybody on the Chargers. But what's interesting here, I noticed when I looked at the fantasy points data, his catchable target rate was only 66%. I don't know why. Like, Quentin Johnston's rate was very high. Keenan Allen's was very high. For some reason, the passes Herbert threw to Ladd, that's when he decided he couldn't throw an accurate pass. I don't know. That just feels like a blip to me, though. Because not only was the usage great, he played great. He finished 5th highest among all wide receivers in separation score. He was open all over the field. Now he gets to play the Raiders. The Raiders, who allowed the 6th most receiving yards to wide receivers last week against the Patriots wide receivers, by the way, who their biggest wide receiver, nobody even has him on your team. And last year, they allowed the 7th most yards to slot wide receivers and the 3rd most fantasy points to slot wide receivers. The only thing Ladd was missing in week 1 was a touchdown. Sure, last week they went to Keenan, they went to QJ. What if they go to Ladd McConkey this week? Which is very possible because I promise you, Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston are not going to score a touchdown every single game of the season. If he scores a touchdown this week and gets some more catchable targets, like his catchable target rate goes up, he's going to absolutely go nuclear in this game against a weak defense, this Raiders defense. And another thing that's great here, the Raiders actually finished first among all teams in neutral situation pass rate. They are a pass-heavy, pass-first offense. They ran the most plays. They played the fastest pace. This is going to be a fast-paced, high-scoring game, fantasy points all over the place. And Ladd McConkey is going to lead the way for the Chargers wide receivers this week and remind you why you drafted him so early.
So you're going to hear us talk a lot about usage, things like snaps and routes and targets and target share, air yards, all of that stuff for a reason. That's what leads to fantasy production, right? You got to get targets. If you're running back, you got to get carries. That's just common sense. So this just has to start with the guy who not only was number 1 last week, but off the charts, Jackson Smith and Jigma in Seattle. Let me explain exactly how insane his stat line was from the opening game. He wound up with a target share of 56.5%. That's right. More than half the time that Sam Darnold decided to throw the ball, it was to the same guy. And that targets per route run was 0.62. And if you're not sure if that's good or not, I guarantee you it's not just good, it's insanely high. So I already mentioned Zay Flowers had a huge game, led the NFL in receiving week 1. His target share was 47.4%. That's almost 10 points behind JSN. And as far as targets per route run, the leader in week 1, another guy who had a big week, not surprisingly, Puka Nacua at 0.52 targets per route run. That's 0.10 less than JSN. Now, let's go back to last year, the leaders in these categories, just for some perspective. The leader in 2024 at target share was Malik Nabers at 32.2%. That's a lot, right? A third of all your team's targets. Again, JSN, for perspective, more than half of his team's targets. The leader in targets per route run last year was also Puka Nacua at 0.38. Keep in mind, Puka Nacua, pretty much a stud. All right, so is this going to keep up? Of course not. It's not sustainable. But I do only mean that in the sense that he's not going to be over 50% and probably over 0.5. As far as him maybe being number 1 in the NFL all season long, this looks like it could definitely hold up. There's a very strong reason why this held up. It's not just because JSN is pretty good. He is the only guy apparently in the receiver room for Seattle that is any good. That's not just my personal observation. In fact, it seems that JSN was the only Seattle receiver that even got above average separation in that game. Nobody else was open at all. So of course, who's Darnold going to look to? His number one receiver, who was getting open all the time. And look, honestly, I hate to say it, this is not surprising. We were pretty much 1,000% out on Cooper Kupp this draft season. And now, I don't know, we can pump that up to like 2,000%. If you look at Kupp's reception perception from last year, it's a sea of red, right? The only route that isn't, not just not green, like not good, they were all red, they were bad, way below league average. The only one that was above was the out route. Everything else that was beyond the line of scrimmage, again, he was way below league average. He's just not getting open anymore. And you can say, well, you know, injuries, he was hurt last year. Yeah, and that's also the problem. He was hurt last year, he was hurt the year before. He's not getting younger. The Rams let him go for a reason. This was his team, his quarterback, his coach. They're done with him. Seattle might be done with him pretty soon too, because he was not good in his Seattle debut. And Torrey Horton, look, maybe a flyer in Dynasty. It's too soon. This guy's still very raw. He's going to be just kind of a deep threat, that sacrificial X. He's not getting targets in that offense. And those young tight ends, Elijah Arroyo, I like him. Way too soon for a guy who's like a mid-round rookie tight end. So on the one hand, I almost don't even care who JSN's going to be playing this week and next week. He's going to be a monster apparently in PPR leagues. But I do feel pretty good about the fact he gets the Steelers defense that looked nothing like we thought they would and gave up a big game to Garrett Wilson. And, you know, this defense overall should be good. But, man, Jackson Smith and Jigba is looking like he's set up for another monster week. And so based on that, I'll tell you what, I'm looking right now an underdog for the early picks for week 2. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 7.5 targets. Think, well, look, yeah, he's number one guy. That seems high. It's low for him. I guarantee you he'll get that. I'm taking the higher here. You can take it too. Combine it with any other picks you like. Now, if you haven't tried underdog, you and your customer here, well, take that pick. Take the freebie that they give you. Just sign up and use code ENDGAME when you check out. You get a free pick. You also still get $50 in bonus funds when you play $5 towards anything. Use code ENDGAME, get your freebie, get your deposit match, plus all the promotions that they're still offering. All right, time for a running back here. Is this going to be the 2025 league winner that nobody was drafting?
Well, we'll see if Travis Etienne is going to be a league winner, but he's certainly going to help your team win matchups right now because, of course, one of the biggest storylines of week 1 was before week 1 was even over, Tank Bigsby traded to the Eagles. This opens the door for Travis Etienne to be the undisputed RB1 in Jacksonville for now. But we're talking about a Booms video for week 2. We only care about right now, and right now he gets to play the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I'm sure it's easy to look and say, well, the Browns, they didn't have any success running the ball against the Bengals last week, but that's the Browns with Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson, and Raheem Sanders. This is Travis Etienne. He looked great last week. I got a tip of a cap to him. He looked great. This is maybe one of the best times I've ever seen him look. He had speed, he had burst, he had vision. He looked like kind of the guy we thought he was going to be as a prospect. Maybe he's healthy. Maybe it's just the start of the season. I don't know, but I don't care because right now he looks good and he's getting all the touches. But even last week he got pretty much all the touches. He had 16 of the team's 24 carries. And the guy who was second was Tank Bigsby, who's no longer there anymore. And he had all but one running back target. And even if you take out that 71-yard run, you say, like, well, it was all one big run. No, he still averaged 4.8 yards per carry. Not only that, he led all running backs, every single one, even King Henry, in yards after contact per attempt. And he was third in yards before contact per attempt. If you remember, I talked a lot about this offseason that last year he struggled in those metrics. He looked terrible. For whatever reason, right now, he's running great. Maybe he's motivated. Maybe he's healthy, like I said. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. And then maybe you're like, well, last week was the Panthers. Sure, it was the Panthers. But this is the Bengals, and I'm not buying into the Bengals suddenly being a good run defense because of what happened against the Cleveland Browns. Travis Etienne is going to get all the carries in this offense right now. He's going to get a ton of targets in this offense right now. Sure, maybe as the season goes on, we see more Tootin, we see more LaQuint Allen, but right now, we're not going to see a whole lot of those guys. It's going to be Travis Etienne. This is a great matchup this week. I think Travis Etienne is a borderline must-start running back this week. There are plenty of running backs I would bench for Travis Etienne.
All right, let's get back to wide receiver. Mentioned Zay Flowers earlier. You know that he had quite a big game against Buffalo. Again, most receiving yards. I think that just opens the door for a guy who had a pretty nice game already week 1. Garrett Wilson might just break down the door in week 2 and possibly lead the NFL in week 2 in receiving yards, just like Flowers did. Look, he had a pretty good game already. His first game with Justin Fields. I know I wouldn't even say skeptical. I was just like a little cautious. Let's see how these guys are going to jive. Is the chemistry going to be there? Is Justin Fields going to look better in a Jets uniform than a Steelers uniform? I think the answer was pretty much yes on both counts. Garrett Wilson, 7 catches, 95 yards, a touchdown. That's really good. And that was against what was supposedly a good Steelers defense. Not so much. But anyways, this Buffalo defense, not too good. And look, this isn't just a brand new thing. This isn't just, oh, well, 2 good teams and high scoring back and forth. Buffalo's defense gave up a lot of passing yards throughout the second half of last season, especially. They did a lot of this where they basically just, gave up points and said, okay, Josh Allen, let's lead us to victory toward the end of the game, which he did last week. And sure, maybe that's just their plan. I don't know if that's a great blueprint for a Super Bowl, but whatever. But here's the thing. So Garrett Wilson was good last week. Justin Fields was good last week. That's underselling it. So Garrett Wilson might be finally elite. So last week, there were only 2 wide receivers in the NFL who had a 100% snap rate. They were never off the field. Number 1 was Justin Jefferson, and the other one was Garrett Wilson. Of course, Garrett Wilson up there as well as far as routes, target share, air yards, all of that. Because again, this is one of the reasons we were in on Garrett Wilson during draft season. There's no competition here. Honestly, name more than one New York Jets wide receiver who isn't Garrett Wilson. All right, but ultimately, you know what? I have to say this is just as much about Justin Fields as Garrett Wilson. We knew Garrett Wilson was good. We knew that he didn't have a lot of competition for targets and still doesn't. But that was my only thing, is what is Justin Fields going to look like? And man, he wasn't just good, he was really good. A 72.7% completion rate. And when we talk about being on target, where most of the times his target was Garrett Wilson, Justin Fields was in the top 5 among all quarterbacks in on-target percentage last week. And of those top 5, which he was a part of, he had the fewest bad throws, only 1. Look, we didn't think this Jets offense was going to be necessarily one of the highest scoring. We didn't think that this was a team that was going to get in a bunch of shootouts. It might be 2 weeks in a row where they're doing just that, trying to keep pace with Buffalo. This is good for Fields, and this is very good for Garrett Wilson. So that leads us to another young wide receiver that you think might smash again this week.
Yeah, we liked Ricky Pearsall a lot last week, but I like him even more this week going against the Saints. Sorry, Juice, I know we keep picking on your Saints, but for good reason. Look at what Marvin Harrison just did. He had 5 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown on only 6 targets. And did you happen to see what happened on that 6th target? He was wide open for probably a 98-yard touchdown, and Kyler missed him. I mean, imagine the day Marvin Harrison could have had if Kyler just hits him on that easy pass over the middle and he goes 98 yards to the house. Now it's Ricky Pearsall's time. We're going to pick on the Saints defense all year long because we should, because they're not very good. And look at the 49ers situation right now. We already know George Kittle, he's on IR. Juwan Jennings got that shoulder injury. They're saying day to day, they're saying they'll see if he can play. Does it matter? What was Juwan Jennings even doing in that game before he got hurt? Coming off an injury, I'm not worried about Juwan Jennings. It's going to be Christian McCaffrey and Ricky Pearsall as the only guys in this offense that are going to be getting any valuable touches. And look at what Ricky Pearsall did in the second half with Kittle out and Jennings only playing a few snaps. He led the team in first read percentage in the second half. And as you can see, it was just basically him and Christian McCaffrey in the passing game. And he also had 10.8 expected fantasy points in just the second half alone, and over 90 air yards in just the second half alone. And that was against a very good, arguably one of the best defenses in the NFL, the Seattle Seahawks. Have I mentioned yet that he plays the Saints this week? Now, I know there's one big elephant in the room right now, and I'm not going to ignore it. It's Brock Purdy dealing. The shoulder doesn't sound like it's an issue. It's his non-throwing shoulder. That sounds like no big deal. But he's got some sort of toe issue. But look, if it's Mac Jones, I still think he can be good. Maybe he won't go nuclear with Mac Jones, but we saw Brian Thomas Jr. last year be a monster down the stretch with Mac Jones. You're telling me Ricky Pearsall and Mac Jones against the Saints can at least be very good. So sure, if it's Mac Jones, maybe he's not one of the highest scoring wide receivers this week. He's just a very good wide receiver. But if it's Brock Purdy, he very well could be one of the highest scoring wide receivers this week.
Well, George Kittle is out. Evan Ingram might be out. Brock Bowers, hopefully not. Yeah, tight end is already looking pretty rough. So I don't feel like I need to mention a tight end, but as I was looking at the waiver wire and I talked about, several guys this week, I mean, look, I don't know the last time, if ever, I've gotten kind of excited about Hunter Henry, especially in the Patriots offense. I'm kind of excited about him this week, and I'll tell you why. So overall, as I did mention on the video, the numbers were good. Of course, a pretty good week as far as getting yardage and, didn't score touchdowns, so it wasn't a huge fantasy day. But let's look at what was good underneath the surface. Last week, among all tight ends, he was 5th in targets. In fact, the same amount of targets as Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. He was 6th in routes run. That matters for a tight end who isn't always out there to catch the ball. Hunter Henry is. Had a very healthy 1.83 yards per route run. And surprisingly, he was one of the leaders in total air yards. And I don't just mean at tight end, I mean overall. Somehow among all receivers and tight ends, Hunter Henry was 10th last week. And we know Kayshon Boutte was even higher than that. This Patriots team actually kind of threw it a lot. Now this week, they're going to get to face the Dolphins. Are they going to even have to throw the ball against the Dolphins? We shall see. I think they'll be able to. I still think they will. This is an NFL team, right? Maybe the Dolphins aren't that horrific, but still, it doesn't matter. They're going to pass the ball. And the Dolphins, among other things, last week, they just gave up a pretty big game to a rookie tight end in his first ever NFL action, Tyler Warren. And you might not even know, they gave up also a 20-yard play to backup tight end Mo Alley-Cox. So they allowed a total of 8 catches for 96 yards just to tight ends in week 1. Look, the Dolphins have a lot of issues, but this might be a recurring issue. This Dolphins defense runs a 3-4. Those outside linebackers, Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson, Matthew Judon, Bradley Chubb, good pass rushers, but that's what they're there to do. They're not great in coverage. The interior linebackers there are supposed to be, both Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson, well below league average in terms of coverage grade according to PFF last week. And look, this is not an area of strength anyways for Jordan Brooks, right? He was below average last year in coverage. Dodson was good last year, but things have changed. Maybe they'll get better, but still, I feel like there are a lot of weaknesses in general on this defense, on this offense. This is a great spot for Hunter Henry, right? He's going to get a lot of targets. He's going to get the air yards. He's got an opportunity here to put up a legitimately big game. And so, as I said in the waiver wire video, if you're looking for a replacement, you need a tight end, he is first on my list. And even if you don't, if you're not sure, maybe stream tight end, he's first on my list as well. And I think that he's a guy who's going to probably wind up as a top 5. You know what? Maybe Bowers isn't out there. Maybe some other guys struggle. Top 3 scorer at tight end in week 2. All right, we got plenty more to help you out this week with your fantasy lineups. Start, sit at every position. Just check out this week's playlist.